If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we are going to go through everything you need to know in order to create your own Spectre in Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition, or W20 as some folks call it these days. Before we properly sink our teeth into tonight's episode, I wish to tell you what you'll need in order to follow along with me to make your first Spectre in W20. First and foremost, you will need a copy of the W20 core book, either as a physical or PDF copy if you are a weirdo or allergic to books or something. If you are playing the game old school with the archaic devices known as pen and paper, you may have a friend, or two, who is willing to lend you their copy, but as more and more restless dead are seeking the likes of Discord and Roll20 to play, it is highly unlikely someone will just lend you their copy of the book from afar. The easiest place to buy a physical or digital copy of W20 and other supplement books is by going to drivethrurpg.com. I am going to presume that you have discovered Wraith the Oblivion from one of three popular sources. You have either picked up it through playing the Necromantic Clans in Vampire the Masquerade, the Echoes of New York actual play on Q-Times' YouTube channel, or, more recently, the VR Wraith the Oblivion game, Afterlife. If your discovery of Wraith comes from the former, you should know that there are not different species of ghosts like there are different vampire clans. Wraiths can join certain guilds and be associated with different legions, which may determine their political outlook, their appearance to a minor extent, and some of their powers, but they are not compulsory for players to join. Spectres, however, are very different ghostly entities. Spectres fall into one of 6 castes. I shan't go too in depth with them for now, but I will provide a basic outline for you here. Mortarites are mortals whose souls were claimed by Oblivion the moment of their death, as they technically aren't a true caste and are thus the lowest status in Spectre society. Striplings are another informal caste that consists of children who are no older than 10 years old. Not all children are striplings, but all striplings are children. You must choose another caste to be a part of. Doppelgangers are exactly what their namesake says, the most wraith-like of all the Spectres and barely edge out of the Mortarite caste. Nephraks are formal doppelgangers whose corpus are so physically warped that they can no longer conceal the ravages of Oblivion. They see this as a blessing, taking up the roles of artists, priests, etc. in Spectre society. Shades are spectres who were wraiths who were devoured by Oblivion, harrowings, or caught in a maelstrom, and are the most monstrous in appearance out of all the ones mentioned so far. Finally, there are the Malfeans, beings of obscene levels of godlike power and horrific alien natures, and are not recommended for player characters. Once you have the core book and any other source books you want, you will need 2 character sheets. Not only do you have to create a character sheet for your main character, but you must also design the sheet for your psyche, the more positive, uplifting part of the Spectre trying to beckon you into transcendence. I will provide a fuller description later in this tutorial. DriveThruRPG doesn't easily provide PDF copies, so you'll have to look elsewhere to find an interactive PDF character sheet. For this episode, I will be using the MrGon.RockSolidShells.com interactive sheets, but there are others available, should you wish to use a different format. It should be noted that you cannot use older Wraith sheets when creating your 20th anniversary Wraith, for reasons we will soon explore. With that preparation shenanigans biting the dust, one can now begin to create their Spectre character. There is no system or dice roll to be made when to determine your character's stats, unless you really want to, of course. You are free to design the character you want to play in your story. W20 uses the storyteller system, which encourages players to become one with their character, to possess them as it were. Wraith has players assume the roles of ghosts, which means they've already had a life and are now very much dead. They now have a whole load of memories, good, bad, and a ton of regrets. What sort of person were they in life? What did they do? How did they go about doing it? In addition to this, think about how they died. Was it through natural causes? Were they murdered? If so, how? Or perhaps they were struck by lightning. These things I've just described to you take up the life, death, and regret portions at the top of the character sheet. Let us now look at the top of the character sheet, which you should be able to fill mostly out by yourself. Name is obviously your character's name, be it their actual name or a pseudonym. Player is obviously you, and if you have problems with that, I really suggest you stop listening to this, as this is not for you. Chronicle is the name of the story you're playing in. Whereas Wraith are spirits of the dead who, for whatever reason, have not given up from the mortal existence and have not moved on from their former lives, Spectres are creatures that don't seek redemption or understanding. They seek nothing more but the destruction and obsess over the destructive aspects of its dark passions, fueled by their pains of oblivion. They have no remorse or concept of mercy. Your Spectre should be described as pure jealousy or hate personified. In less words, they are evil creatures that should make characters feel uncomfortable, not players. To that end, if what I've described to you is too much, that is okay. Skip this podcast episode and tune in next time. Whereas some become spectres immediately upon death, it is not uncommon for wraiths to be overwhelmed by their shadow and devoured by oblivion. Think about the possibilities if you are making a spectre for Spectre Chronicle. If your wraith becomes a spectre during your game, this will obviously be roleplayed. Think also how your spectre will look, as many go out of their way to make themselves look more hideous and monstrous, turning their hair into thorns, flaunt their suicide wounds, etc., etc. Most run about naked and have unique idiosyncrasies such as the prey they choose or how they claw their face, revealing bone as they do so. As for my example character, Alice Wade was once a happy child with simple, happy dreams. She played with her friends and loved sharing their happy moments with them and the highlights of her parents. Problem was, Alice had no friends, not real ones anyway. There were ghosts of ages past whose weirdly alien names confused Mr. and Mrs. Wade. They did nothing at first, as most kids play imaginary games with themselves. But when Alice's behaviour changed and became more secluded, Mr. and Mrs. Wade became very concerned with Alice's violent outbursts, so much so that they skipped over therapy and went straight to having her exorcised, which only intensified Alice's anger. When that didn't work, they sent her away, the parents I mean, to have her tested for various mental conditions, states of being she did not possess when she entered. These doctors hypothesized the idea that perhaps there was something supernatural afoot and began performing stranger, immoral tests. Eventually, the 9-year-old Alice could not cope and she died a slow and painful death. How she died was never fully documented, but what is known to the spectres of the underworld is that Alice is a very troubled individual, broken and angry. There are 3 boxes left for you to fill out. We will ignore Shadow, which we'll pretend is Psyche for now, leaving 2. Nature and demeanor are very similar in definition but are very different in how one would use them, for they define you and your character and how they interact with the world. Demeanor is how you choose to present your character to the world, whilst nature is how they truly are. To use an extremely crass example, you may seem like the nicest person in the world to the public eye, but deep down you are a deranged psychopath who eats babies for breakfast without the smallest amount of remorse. Now, going back to the character creation process, both nature and demeanor splinter off into many different archetypes, each one providing different ways for players to regain willpower, a finite resource a player may use in a tricky situation. There are lots to choose from, so I'll let you discover those for yourself. To add this information to Alice, she is a literal child, once filled with innocence and wonder, so it would make sense for either her nature or demeanor, or perhaps both, to be the child archetype. I will assign it to her demeanor, for I feel there is potentially a lot more menace brooding under her innocent looks. She is able to gain back a willpower point when she gets her own way, despite the objections of others. Through horrible experimentation and listening to whatever she originally was talking to, she became a violent bully, thriving in the suffering of others, especially if she ends up on top with the whole world wrapped around her finger. I think this fits the Bravo nature, which will allow her to regain a willpower point every time she beats someone down verbally or physically. Before we move further down the page, I will mention that each Spectre cast has different abilities and weaknesses, which affect how you customize your character. to prevent this guide from being too complicated and long, I shall not go through every single one of them. For Alice, I will reference the Stripling Arcanae and Weaknesses, which can be found on page 374 of the core book, alongside the other ones of course. Now that you've established some lore regarding your character, you should have an idea what sort of person they are when you assign points into your attributes. How do they solve their problems? Fighting, thinking, or talking? How would they naturally interact with the world? The attribute section is made up of 3 categories: physical, mental, and social. You start by assigning 1 point in all the attributes. You then distribute 7 points in a primary attribute, 5 points to a secondary attribute, and 3 dots to a tertiary group. If you decide to put 4 points in a particular attribute, you can choose to assign a specialty to it. The exception to this distribution is if you play a stripling character, where your primary attribute gets 6 points, the secondary attribute gets 4 points, and the tertiary group gets 2 points. Alice's head was always in the clouds, never really caring for score or anything real, so I reckon the mental attributes are the lowest. Prone to violent outbursts, I could place her primary attribute into strength, leaving her social as the secondary one. Starting with the physical attributes, Alice's strength is at 3, the dexterity is 4, and the stamina is 2. With the social attributes, charisma is 2, manipulation is 3, and appearance is 2, and with the mental attributes, perception is 3, and intelligence and wits are 1. Dice rolls in Wraith the Oblivion are usually made up of 1 attribute plus an ability, as there are many ways of demonstrating feats of strength and intelligence unless you're wanting to deadlift a donkey for example, as that would be pure strength by my reckoning at least. The abilities are divided up into, from left to right, talents, skills, and knowledges. Similarly to attributes, abilities are prioritized in primary, secondary, and tertiary groups, with no ability getting more than 3 points at this point. That said, any dots that are 4 or higher later down the line can have a specialty assigned to it. This means that when using a specialty, you may re-roll 10s you get for more successes. Your primary group gets 13 points, secondary gets 9 points, and tertiary gets 5 points. The distribution of Alice's points will point towards Alice's abilities to frighten and claw at those around her like the furious animal she has become, whilst perhaps maintaining some curiosity for the Shadowlands, the world that her friends came from. She does not lead, but is pointed at something to cause chaos, making her foes feel the pain she feels, agony endured from her mortal days. So I decided that talents would be the primary ability group, skills would be the tertiary group, and knowledges would be the secondary group. So going back to talents, alertness is 3, awareness is 3, brawl is 2, intimidation is 2, persuasion is 1, and subterfuge is 2. With the skills, 3 points in meditation, 1 point in performance, and 1 point in stealth, and knowledges, 1 point in computer, 1 point in enigmas, 3 points in investigation, 3 points in occult, and 1 point in technology. Next is the advantages section, which is where the character creation process truly becomes unique. On the top left pane is backgrounds, for which you have 5 points to spend, as opposed to the usual 7. These should support the character concept and add history and context to their existence. Spectres cannot take Edleon or notoriety, but they do have access to Shadowlands and Labyrinth. Otherwise, your storyteller would tell you what backgrounds are appropriate and which are not, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we will assume we can do as we please. For the time being, Alice's backgrounds have become quite simple. I've put 3 points in Shadowlands and 2 points in Labyrinth. Later on in this tutorial, I will add a significant amount more to add to those allies and contacts that I spoke of earlier on. Beneath backgrounds is Arcanae, which are the various powers of Wraiths and Spectres. Some casts do not have access to Wraith Arcanae, and the amount of Dark Arcanae varies from cast to cast. Spectres are not limited to choosing only 3 Arcanae like Wraiths are. You will notice that the Arcanae are divided up into 2 different types, Common and Initiate. Common arts are widely recognized manifestations of a particular arcanus that is in widespread use throughout the underworld. Initiate arts are secrets of the guilds that are only taught to its members and may learn from the initiate art in place of a common one if they so choose. Obviously, Spectres do not have access to these. All Spectres begin with 1 dot in Collogue, which is the hive mind ability that all Spectres instinctually have. Alice is a stripling Nephrak. Because she is a Nephrak, I'm assuming she looks very much like a twisted spectre scarred by Oblivion. However, because she is a stripling, I have access to all Wraith Arcani and Dark Arcani. Alice receives 1 dot in Shroud Rendering. As a stripling, I have 7 dots to spend how I please. I shall point another point in Collogue, which takes the total up to 2. I shall put 3 points in Maleficence, 2 points in Keening, and 1 point in Outrage. To the right of backgrounds is Passions, for which you have 10 points to spend. For Spectres, this is replaced with Dark Passions, which is not as hopeful as a Wraith's might be. Hate, greed, malice, envy, lust, jealousy, and bitterness fuel the Spectre and their most potent source of pathos, or angst, which is what it should be and not whatever it is labelled on the Wraith character sheet. Passions are linked to who you are and why your character exists as a Spectre. They are divided into 3 parts: a statement, an emotion, and a score of 1 to 5. These are likely to change over the course of the story. For example, your character may wish to destroy their killer. A dark passion they would go as the killer is destroyed. Alice actually has 8 points to spend on her dark passions, as restricted by the limitations of the stripling cast. It is fair to assume she has a bitter hatred for adults, given they are the ones who ruined her life. She definitely wants affection, but given how twisted her outlook on life is, she would probably end up forming a cult and calling that her new family, making them do horrible things in the process. Ultimately, she just wants the world to crumble, just like everyone ruined her world, so she would start with the London Necropolis. Let us look at these dark passions now. The first one with 2 dots, advance the decay of the London Necropolis with the emotion of envy. The second one with 3 points, destroy the hierarchy with the emotion of hate. The last one also has 3 points, and it is find a family with the emotion of jealousy. If your Spectre is a doppelganger, you have to choose fetters, which you also have 10 points to spend on. They are important objects, people, things, and places tied to your former mortal life that tie you to the Skinlands, the land of the living. It is possible to link one's fetters and passions together. As a stripling, Alice may have fetters depending on her other caste. As she is a Nephrak, she may not have fetters, which I think makes sense given her total detachment from human society. Before spending your freebie points, there are a few things we have to do first. Add 10 points to Corpus, which acts as your health. This cannot be increased with freebie points. Add 5 points of willpower, and add 5 points to Pathos, which Spectres refer to as angst. You may now spend your 20 freebie points however you please, which is 5 more than what you would get when spending freebie points to create Wraith characters. You can also gain 7 additional freebie points, but so does your Psyche, making it more potent as an antagonist. Attribute, Arcanos, and Shade Arts cost 5 points, abilities Dark Passions and Willpower cost 2 points, Background and Fetters cost 1 point, and Angst costs 1 point for 2 dots. These numbers change when you spend experience points at the end of each session. A new ability costs 3 points. Increasing an ability you already possess is the current rating times 2. A new Arcanos and Shadecraft costs 6 points, but to increase one you already possess, it is the current rating times 2. To increase an attribute, it is the current rating times 3, and to increase your willpower, it costs the current rating, so if you have 5 willpower and you want to make 6, that will cost you 5 experience points. So regarding Alice, I have put 2 additional points into Brawl, which takes it up to 4. I've put an additional point into Intimidation, which takes that up to 3. I've given her 3 points in Allies, 3 points in Contacts, and 2 points in Status. I have also put 2 additional points into Willpower that takes the total up to 7, and 4 points extra in Pathos, or Angst should I say, that takes the total up to 9. But there is one more thing we have to do before finishing this tutorial, which is the creation of the Psyche, the hidden half of every Spectre, the version of themselves trying to push them away from their worst impulses and acts of cruelty, in an attempt to keep them away from Oblivion. Whilst controlled by another player at the table, it is you, the player, that creates the Psyche, for they are, as previously stated, a part of your character, the shadow or Psyche as it should be labelled here. fill this section in with your character's name. As with the Spectre proper, one must assign an archetype to the psyche, both on the main character sheet and the Shadow/Psyche one. Unlike the Spectre proper, the psyche has a list of their own archetypes to choose from, which you can read at your own leisure. Concerning Alice, there is nothing that this Spectre wants to do now than cause carnage and spread the malice inflicted upon her. The only thing that would stop her was something that was the total opposite of that, which I think would befit the Saint Psyche archetype. Next has us determine the Psyche's angst, which is similar to the Wraith's pathos, the energy of pure emotion. They do this by feeling an emotion connected with their passion, which are emotions intimately connected to their identity. Permanent pathos is always less or equal to your Spectre's willpower. You then roll that number of d10s with a difficulty of 6. The number of successes equal the permanent pathos of the Psyche. Ones do not cancel successes in this instance. Using Alice as an example, she has 7 points of willpower, so I grab my 7 d10s and roll. I got 2 10s, 8, 7, 5 and 2 1s. As 5, 4 and 1 are below 6, Alice's Psyche is now 4. It is advised that STs do this and not share the result with the respective player, so they do not know the strength of their adversary. Psyche probably do not have willpower for this reason. Then there are the passions, which are almost identical to dark passions of the Spectre. They are filled out in a similar fashion to the Spectre's dark passions, a statement, an emotion, and a score of 1 to 5. They can parallel the main dark passions or be totally detached from them. Either way, you have 7 points to spend here, but they cannot exceed the maximum level of your dark passions. All of Alice's passions are connected to the dark passions, in fact they are the total opposites of them. Show forgiveness for my father has 3 points, show love for my mother has 2 points, and respect the scientist that tried to help me has 2 points. The Psyche also has freebie points, which it has 10 to spend on passions, willpower and fronds, which are the unique powers owned only by the Psyche, each one having its own expenditure cost. To increase the max pathos rating, you spend 5 points, whilst increasing the current pool to a new level costs 2 points, and increasing a new passion costs 1 point. Regarding Alice's Psyche, I've increased the pathos by 1, I've increased the show love for my mother and respect the scientist that tried to help me passions by 1 also, both of which now tallying up to 3, and regarding fronds, memories of life and guilt are the ones I've assigned to her. Once you have finished adding freebie points and rolling your d10s, you can finally say that you have made your first Spectre in Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition and Psyche. Yes, the book has all that you need to understand the character creation process, but I have found that sometimes helps to have someone walk you through the process, rather than nag your storyteller 100 times. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.